Welcome everyone to December 17th, our Career Impact Chat, talking about kind of measuring impact and building a career in that area. Dr. Ayse Kayadifici is a longtime friend, colleague, innovator. I put her bio in the chat. I will summarize a few things, but she is a research affiliate at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security, an adjunct professor at Georgetown. She served as the assistant professor and associate director of the conflict resolution program at Georgetown for many years. She has a PhD from American University. She's worked at U.S. Institute of Peace. She's consulted probably for almost every major organization you can think of, and is an expert in so many things, but particularly in evaluation, in impact, in teaching, in training, in interfaith engagement, in religion and peace building, in development, security. So I could go on forever. And she really has an incredible capacity to do innovative work and not be too jaded by the bureaucracy, and really think about also innovate. And she's done a lot of consultancies also for USAID and social impact and other organizations, trying to both design systems to look at how we measure the metrics and impact of the work, and then also a lot of applied evaluation work, both midterm and end of project level, to basically be like, so what actually happened as a result of this particular effort or project? And she's published a lot, many articles, co-written books, and many other things. So I will put her LinkedIn profile in the chat. For people who are just joining us, if this is your first PCDN Impact Career Chat, we do this every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern time. And we have guests from all over the world. We're always open to recommendations. And please check out PCDN's other resources. And starting in January, Rotary will be sponsoring this series for probably 5 or 6 months. And we're already booked, I think, through March. So we'll have people from impact investing, from UNICEF for USA, from Lebanon, and we get people from all over the world. And today I can see we have people from, hi Isabel, nice to see you, from Brussels, Abdi, who's in the middle of nowhere in northern Kenya. He was one of our speakers a while back, and lots of other people. So I'm going to turn it over to Ayse, and she'll do a short presentation, and then we'll open it up for a totally informal conversation. So thank you so much, Ayse, for taking time.
Thank you so much for having me, Craig. It's really, really an honor and pleasure to be here. And we miss you in Washington, D.C. And so I'm going to just share my screen. I have a few PowerPoints to sort of, but they're not very detailed. So it's just to start a conversation about these issues. And I would like this conversation to be informal and more of a question answer format. So I never thought I would ever do what you call evaluation when I first started my career. I started studying conflict resolution in 1996. I started my PhD in 1997. Evaluation was never something that we learned about, talked about. And so I wasn't even sure what evaluation was really meant to do. So, I mean, I was more familiar with research methods, etc., as a student. But over the years, I have started not only appreciating how important it is, but really enjoy evaluation of programs. And I find it really important for better ways of doing what we're doing. One of the things that I observed, especially in my field in conflict resolution, but I believe this is also true in development as well. Many of us come into this field with a lot of passion to do some good, and that we want to change the world. We want to change the conflict society's conflictual relations to more peaceful relations. But one of the biggest questions in our field is we are not a theoretical field. We're a very intervention-oriented field, at least the way I practiced it. But how do we know we're achieving what we're wanted to achieve in the first place? How impactful are our interventions? But we all start this with the aim of trying to do some good, but are we really doing good? And are we causing any harm? Are there any unintended consequences? So one of the biggest growing fields that I observed as a faculty member teaching at Georgetown master's program for my students is the field of evaluation. I think that's a great change from where I started. When the field of evaluation started like 2 decades ago, approximately, there was a lot of skepticism and a lot of resistance to evaluation in the field, because nobody wants to have someone who has not been familiar with the projects that they've been working on so passionately with so much care to come and tell them how they're doing. So because at the end of the day, evaluation is perceived as a judgment to the work that you're doing. So there was a lot of resistance to it. But today, it is one of the biggest growing fields in the job market, and there's a big demand for it. And usually the other perception was that evaluators were not really sort of welcomed, but now that has also changed a lot. There's actually one of the most recent evaluations I've done. There was so much reception, positive reception, and people that I interviewed before I did an evaluative assessment, which is this first stage before you actually do the impact assessment, to see if the organization has the necessary data and the will and interest, if it's the right timing to the evaluation. I was so impressed and so surprised to see how everyone I talked in the organization was like, yes, please, we need this so much. So I think that change is very important in the culture of our communities who are doing this work. Also, I think part of the change in the attitude is a result of the funders. Funders now make it a requirement for evaluation to take place. And one of the reasons for this is that if you look at, I think a study in 2016 identified more than 1.6 million nonprofit organizations in the US, which was about 10% of the US workforce. And if you consider how many organizations there are and how little the funding is, how should funders decide whom to give funding? So evaluation and assessing who's doing what kind of work becomes very important. But one of the other things that was a challenge was, so everybody wants to show that they're doing good. So we had to create a culture that was open to growth and learning. So rather than creating a culture where everybody was saying, okay, we did all these best programs and we are how successful we are, we have moved from that approach to something along the lines of how are we improving? What are we learning from our own mistakes? There has been a shift in more honest, more sort of critical reflection. So this also coincides with the newer approaches in evaluation, rather than having this very judgmental, whether your project is good or bad attitude, to what we call positive approaches to peace, looking at what are the areas that we've been more successful, what are the areas that we have not been as impactful as we would like to be, in what areas that we can grow and learn from. So there has been a shift in organizations' funding that rewards that learning. So many of the organizations now have a learning and knowledge management departments, which really focuses on growing. And this also is important for development of theory and practice in general, because I think organizations like Search for Common Ground, USAID's Clearinghouse, as well as the MNE for Peace, which is a evaluation and monitoring sort of network for peace and development programs, have started sharing many of the evaluation reports, as long as they were allowed to be public, so that there's a learning in the in our fields in general. So it's not just used for improving programming or getting more funding in the field, but also how can we contribute to doing better peace building development programs in our fields. So I think these are really very good sort of changes in the way we look and approach evaluation and our fields in general. So I think another thing I think is important is that, for example, I was teaching a course on evaluation and monitoring at Georgetown University. So one of the assignments I had for my student was to reach out to an organization of their own choosing in the area of their own interest, and ask them if they could volunteer to work with them to develop either an evaluation design, or help them if they were already having an evaluation to work on that, and then be that part of the class assignment. So this led a lot of my students to get not only internships, but have long-term jobs and careers in evaluation. In fact, many of our students who were graduating, one of the top skills that they were asked was about monitoring and evaluation because of this sudden growth in the field. And the other thing is that is important to mention, just being an expert in evaluation and monitoring is not always sufficient. What is important is to, for example, in our fields like conflict resolution, peace building, and development, the evaluators also need to have a good understanding of the kind of work, kind of what do we mean by peace, for example? Because if you don't know what's the end goal, what are we trying to achieve? How do we even measure success? How do we know when we're achieving our goals, if that goal is even relevant? So there has been a need for not just plain evaluation specialists, but evaluation specialists that have a good understanding in working in complex dynamic environments, that have a sensitivity to understand do no harm analysis, as well as gender sensitivity. So these have been some really important developments that had to be incorporated into evaluation training and skills development. Some of the most common, what you can do when you're evaluation specialist, for example. So some of the titles in the career of evaluation and monitoring could be like, you could be an independent consultant. Because I have multiple hats as a faculty, as a researcher, but also as a consultant, I go with the independent consultant role, which happens, for example, when there's an evaluation tender, when there's a sort of an organization looking for evaluations, if it is time-wise within my time frame, as well as if it's in my skill set, I will submit a proposal to do the evaluation, and you compete with other individuals. But then there are many organizations are sort of hiring now in-house monitoring and evaluation officers, monitoring and evaluation managers, and specialists. So some of these, for example, managers would manage the relations between organizational evaluation teams as well as external evaluation teams. Officers may also do work in terms of, some of the key data collection, monitoring, etc. Some of the responsibilities involved in general with this career path is first planning. One of the important roles of the evaluation is to inform the programming and the design of projects. So the reason we do evaluation is how do we improve our work. So if many of the evaluation specialists and experts work with project staffs, partners, and other stakeholders to design better programs and to sort of identify better goals and objectives based on what they have learned from the evaluation process. Then another responsibility is to monitor and track the progress of the project as it's happening. This is day-to-day monitoring and evaluation responsibility. It's constantly updating the information, making recommendations and adjustments. For example, one of the biggest challenges is that you started doing a program and you had all these goals, but something in the context changed and you have to adjust. As a monitoring and evaluation specialist, you observe whether the project is on track, whether it's sort of, it was the right place. What about the changing conditions in the environment? How do we adjust? So that's a big responsibility as well. Then another important responsibility is determining the data analysis procedures, doing qualitative as well as quantitative analysis. This is related to the analysis and reporting responsibilities. Then knowledge management is another element of the responsibilities. How do we provide support to knowledge management processes within our organizations? How do we convene communities of practice and other organizational learning practices? How do we identify and track best practices, not only in our field, but also in monitoring and evaluation, because there's always something is coming up, a new methodology, a new approach. So we have to be really on top of identifying what are the right tools and mechanisms for the projects that we're being involved in. Of course, then to contribute to broader learning, just not only in our own organizations, but evaluation specialists and in this area contribute to the study, research through publication of findings and contribute to the not only the evaluation field in general, what are best ways of doing an evaluation, for example, but distilling the results and contributing to those fields. So for example, how do you do better interfaith dialogues? How do you address climate and gender? What are some of the better ways of doing this? So some of the skills that I found very important is first the problem analysis. And this is very important, for example, when you're evaluating a project, whether it's relevant to the problem. So you have to be able to do a conflict analysis, problem analysis, stakeholder analysis yourself to be able to evaluate the program. How do you evaluate a program if you don't know what the program is about? A good understanding of different research and evaluation designs. There's 7+ different evaluation designs that can be happening, but the kind of the project that is going to be evaluated informs what design is possible to do. For example, do you have enough data? What are some of the questions or issues that the project is trying to adjust and address? What can you do experiment? Can you have comparison groups? Is it a long project, meaning has it the program been going on for 5 years, 3 years, or 25 years? So these are all going to be in is there a baseline data? Is there anything to compare the changes? Because one of the important things for an evaluation to happen is that because basically you're measuring the change that happened. To be able to measure the change that happened, you have to know how was the situation when the project started or before the project started. So you have to have a baseline to compare. So if there isn't, so how you design a project to recapture or reconstruct a baseline data. This also requires both qualitative and quantitative data skills, data collection skills. One of the very important skills I find in the field is that there's either too much emphasis on just quantitative skills, or many of the people who focus on qualitative skills don't have enough quantitative skills. But to have a good, rigorous evaluation, you have to triangulate data. You have to compare and contrast data, especially if you're trying to also measure things like trust. Was the project being able to build more trust, etc. So you have to have both of those skills. So qualitative, like how do you create surveys? How do you create questionnaires? How do you use Stata or any other method, technology? But then how do you do interviews? How do you collect data through focus groups? How do you set up an interview questions? How do you do content analysis? So you have to have both of those skills equally. And depending on the project that is going to be evaluated, you need to use different strategies and techniques in combination of these different tools. As I said, to know what you're measuring and whether the program has been successful or not, you have to be aware of the field that the project is taking place. For example, what does peace look like? Are we looking what we say in conflict resolution, peace writ small, peace writ large? What element are we looking for? So you have to be aware of the methodological and theoretical advancements of the respective field. Then you have to be able to do cost-benefit analysis. Yes, there are so many challenges in the field. For example, you could create the best evaluation model, but is there enough funds? Is there enough political? What are some of the political constraints? Are there any sensitivities? For example, is it possible to have access? For example, you want to find out whether one program has been good in de-radicalization ex-terrorists. Do you have access to those people? If you don't have access to those people, what alternative methods can you create? So you have to be really aware of a lot of different things. There's also, and make an understanding of, okay, what are some of the ways that I could do a rigorous analysis or evaluation, but not spend so much money and time? Is there better ways of doing this? Is really important. I would say one of the very important skills, which is usually overlooked, is the communication, cross-cultural communication facilitation skills. I think having great skills in evaluation design methods is important, but if you don't have that personal touch, it really is hard. I had experiences where in some cases where the evaluators, experienced evaluators, were not able to understand some of the cultural sensitivities, and some of the people felt, some of the stakeholders felt that their voices had not been heard. So in my experience, being transparent, having communication. So in a recent evaluation I did, I reached out to the donors who commissioned the, who are funding the evaluation, and asked them to meet with them to understand what were they looking for, what was, they had already sent me documents, but I wanted to understand what were like the key points for them, what was really important about this, how is that was going to be used for them. So they said this was the very first time an evaluator actually made time to talk to them and ask what they felt. And they really said they really appreciated that, because that was something gave them an opportunity for them to help us understand where we're coming. Also, we had an opportunity to reflect on what were some of the challenges and what can be delivered and what cannot be delivered based on their expectations, based on the context of the evaluation. So I see the role of the evaluator. I come from more of an action evaluation, participatory evaluation perspective. And the role of the evaluator is not just evaluation, but facilitation of a dialogue between different stakeholders at the same time, to some extent, to be able to, for example, who gets to define success? Funders, as well as the donors, as the beneficiaries, and the program implementers may have different definitions of success. How can you account for that in your evaluation report? So having the ability to listen with an open mind and communicate. So I also made an sort of tradition or important part of my practice that after I collect the data, which is usually confidential and no one will be referred to by name, but to have a preliminary findings meeting where everyone, the donors, the organization who's being evaluated, as well as everyone who participated in the evaluation process, whether they were members of the facilitation discussions or interviews or surveys, have an opportunity to come and listen. What I have found so far, what I've understood, to give them an opportunity to correct misunderstandings. If they felt anything was missing, they could do it individually or publicly there. So that has worked really well. It sort of helped me to create more of a sense of having them feel that they have been part of the process, which is, I mean, they're not being judged by an external person, but their voices are heard. I found that to be one of the most important practices that I've learned in this. And it came through a lot of experiences before that. Another thing that is important is the leadership and management skills. I think it's really important to distinguish what the leadership and management is like, addressing day-to-day sort of way of the evaluation is practice, but leadership is also being able to inspire and work with people and guide them through complexities of this process. And I think some of the leadership and management skills can be very important in a field like evaluation, where sometimes you may be perceived as someone who's outsider and whose opinions are important, yet can be threatening. So, and I think especially bigger evaluations, it's better to do evaluation within a teamwork. And you have to, it's really important to identify the kind of teamwork, looking at the different skills to complement each other. For example, one person may have more qualitative data analysis skills, another might have more quantitative, and also language skills, cultural sensitivities. So the team is really important, building a team. So working collaboratively in a team environment, being able to adjust is another skill that you don't always get to learn in classes. I also wanted to share with you some of the main areas that you can look for jobs in these areas. For example, American Evaluation Association, Monitoring and Evaluation News, Development Monitoring and Evaluation for Peace, DEVEX, International Development Evaluation Association, PCDN Global, and LinkedIn groups have all special sort of devoted links for evaluation work. And finally, I put together a list of some of the places that you can get these skills. So there's some education programs, and I just learned, I apologize, but I didn't know a Catholic university has a graduate program if Debbie wants to add later on that. But there's American University, Georgetown University, they have some certificate programs, but there are other universities around the globe that provide skills in this area. So I'll just end there, and I'll open up to questions and try to answer them to the best of my ability. And thank you so much for listening.
Ayse, in December 17, where most people are, they shouldn't be traveling, but a lot of people are traveling and preparing for the festivities of the end of the year. And here you are giving us a most superb lecture on such an important topic for becoming more marketable in the present and future jobs in conflict resolution, peace building, development. So all of us here in this group, audience included, on organizers, we're a bunch of nerds trying to do good. And I want to thank you for such an amazing presentation. I have,
thank you.
I'm going to cut short. First of all, thank you. I also miss you tons. And I want to thank you again for doing this, but for doing this on December 17, it's even more meritorious. And I'm going to cut the line. I'm going to ask one question, and then Carmel started from the audience. So thank you so much, Carmel, too. I have two questions, but I'm going to start first with one, and then obviously we want to open up to everyone. And apparently Craig also have questions, and they're coming nicely. So this is an anecdotal observation. I don't consider myself an M&E expert, although I have experience doing research, which you greatly frame evaluation within research. It's just that this is a specific type of research that we do. But this year, I was involved in a couple consultancies, all virtual, obviously, because of this, the nature of this year. And I noticed that one was a 3-hour workshop, very short project. The other one was a slightly longer series of webinars that we had, but it was almost like they were over-evaluating me and the audience. At the end of my 3-hour workshop, they sent a questionnaire. Everyone had to fill it. And I felt, and I want to know your professional and expert opinion on this impression that I got. Are we being over-evaluated at this point? I know you talked to us how at the beginning there was a skepticism, but other extreme in which every single intervention is a little bit over-evaluated to a point that it's exhausting for those providing services and beneficiaries?
I think that's an excellent question, and thank you all those nice words, Kata, and I miss you guys. I think what's happening is that because we have so much pressure to do evaluation, and once you don't know what kind of evaluation is the most useful kind of evaluation, I think there are sometimes overzealous approaches to that. And so, for example, at the end of every event, everything, there's a questionnaire. We do that, but some of those questionnaires, I look at them, and I had to go through mediation services, and at the end of the mediation services, we had to fill in an evaluation form with the evaluator, with the mediators in the room. So it had become a lot like a routine thing. Like after the, how did we do? Good, great. You know, I think that can be over exhausting, really. Is that useful? And organizations are asked to do all of this work. It can create jadedness, and many of how the program was. How do we do that? It's just really important, sort of, and sometimes what is the authenticity of the answers when people are asked to do all of this? So it's really, I think sometimes we don't spend our resources and time wisely. And I think there has to be a better way of thinking about it organizationally to do this. I mean, it's okay to say, how did you think about this program, and have a short evaluation and then give some feedback. But I think we have to really carefully think about how we're evaluating, what we're evaluating. Is it really contributing? What's the purpose of the evaluation? If you think of it that as a project, is it really achieving its own objective? There's something called meta evaluation, evaluating the evaluation. So it's really important to be reflective on that. So going about more evaluation, you could evaluate everything.
Thank you, Aisha. No, I agree. I think sometimes it's it's in automatic mode rather than in reflective mode. Is this really going to improve the objective and the purpose of whatever intervention? Just people or organizations are doing questionnaires up and down, left, right. Following along those lines, a very interesting question from Carmel. It's a question for you. She's asking whether most M&E programs, are they donor focused? So the end goal being an organization is doing well, and are the funds being used appropriately, versus M&E program focused on the beneficiaries, those who receive aid. To your point about who is there defining success. So how do you problematize those?
So I have not done a study of the different evaluation training programs. So I would not be in the best place to respond to that, but I would tell you my personal experience that it has, and a good program would have to have a balanced approach. So one thing I would suggest, if you're planning to apply for a graduate program, to look at their syllabus and to see where they are focused. In my experience, many of the programs, and as having taught that, I was, one of the things I did, I looked at different syllabi of courses, not necessarily the graduate programs per se. I thought a lot of them focus on very standard sort of practices, but did not go in depth to, in my opinion, action oriented evaluation enough. There are new models, for example, new evaluation tools that have been come up. So for example, USAID and others have been using something called most significant change approaches and outcome harvesting. And these are important, for example, if you're trying to find out what were some of the impacts in programs that may not have had clear goals and objectives, or you want to see what other impacts happen, especially in contexts where there's peace, development, complex, dynamic environments, and you're looking for innovative programs. There was a whole trend of innovation and in peace building and development. So traditional approaches have not been successful in assessing those. So to give more voice to beneficiaries and target groups, most significant change stories, which invite people to talk and identify what were some of the most significant changes that happened as a result of that project, have been important. And outcome harvesting approaches uses a sort of, what were some of the outcomes of the project, and how, so you go backward from the project to the outcomes, to the goals, and to see what can we learn from this intervention. And you could combine that with more traditional ones. Sometimes I recommend, depending on the program, to do both. It takes more time, but it's really a useful approach. There were also developmental approaches, which usually engages the evaluator from the beginning of the program as it's been implemented and designed, and then looking and evolving. That takes into consideration the projects take place in dynamic, constantly changing environments. So in my approach, a program should, evaluation program should be able to be up to date on those elements, but definitely address the needs of the donors, because they're the ones who are going to be paying. If you do not have expectations and understanding of those needs, you're not going to be able to develop effective ways. But also, if you do not really understand the other dimension, so you're going to be not able to do a good job. And I think there is a lot of resources in this area. There's not enough books that are coming up. There's a couple of really good, important books, but we need to have more reflective writing on what kind of evaluation tools are good in what context. This is an area that we're still missing, but I think it's really, you have to see, I would say, look at the program. There's, I know, for example, American University has 4 courses that focus on logic frames, etc. Log frames are really important, but you also look at other forms of ways of doing it. When is log frame not appropriate, for example? I hope that was helpful. I was not able to give you the balance, but it depends on the program, I suppose.
So thank you, Ayse, it was wonderful. We have lots of questions coming in. And for anyone who's just joined us, put in the chat where you're zooming in from. We have people still joining. If you have a longer question or comment, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you in the order. I'm gonna do one question, then go to Megan and Samar. So my question is, I mean, I've done evaluation multiple times, different settings. I'm not an expert, but mine is more like a philosophical question. So 20 years ago, the peace building field was horrible at evaluation. Like, we can get funding and you'd be like, people came and they left happy. No donor will fund a project like that anymore.
No.
But my question is, there's two parts. The first part is, we've been doing this and learning for 20 years, but are we actually getting better at building peace? I mean, that's like a big philosophical question. And then the second thing is, I worked at International Alert many years ago, and the head of International Alert at that time did a study called the Utstein study, where they looked at 400 different evaluations across 4 donors or 400 projects. And they basically said, we can evaluate a project, but we're not doing well at the system level. So how do you balance, like, change happens at systems, not at projects? So one is like, are we actually getting better? And then two, like, the change is projectified, but projects don't change systems. So just kind of, what are your thoughts on those?
I would say it's a really important question, especially I'll address the first one. Are we getting better at? I think in some areas, yes. In some areas, no. I'd like to make an analogy with the field of medicine. So if you see conflict as a disease, I mean, we have, and in our field, we have developed some better tools and techniques to address some kind of diseases or some kind of conflicts more than others, but we constantly have new diseases. So some are more like cancer. We are closer to it, but we haven't found the answer. So it's also related to the field itself, because we don't have a good definition of what peace is. And so we have different definitions of what peace is. So you could think about peace as a, like, let's say peace writ small, which is, people who participated in a dialogue program, their relationships have improved, their attitudes have changed. So that's success. And your program achieved its goal because the goal was to be able to transform stereotypes and images, and we got better at that to some extent. We found out what are some of the better ways of doing. But then the second question is it contributing to systemic change or peace writ large? Is it really creating world peace or peace at a country? So also these relate to the philosophical questions of our field and theoretical questions. What should peace look like? What are the indicators of peace? For example, is US is a peaceful country, although we're not having a civil war right now. So and how long should peace last to be able to be peace? For example, if you resolve the conflict between 2 communities for 5 years, that was successful, but then so how do we even put a time frame on that? So these are some of the questions that really we need to articulate more and relate it to evaluation. I mean, I have developed some answers to those questions, for example, but it's really, should we target world peace as our end goal as a field? I mean, is that realistic? Or what should we as a program target for and expect? We have to set up realistic expectations for people not to burn out as well in our field, because I mean, we don't see the consequences or interventions like the medical doctors. The patient either lives, heals. We don't know sometimes if it's going to have any fruit at all. But what is also really newer, I think, is that wasn't there before, is a conscious awareness of do no harm approaches. We did not look at that, and if you don't ask the questions, you don't know the answers. So we're now looking into so programs may do some good, but they may also add some bad. So how do we prevent those things? I think that's a really important element for peace building, is we want to at least do no harm and do some good. So is the program doing that?
Thank you so much. And just 2 resources. I'm on the advisory board of Collaborative Development Associates, who have pioneered the Do No Harm. So if you have not read their work, and they do some of the best locally led perspectives on evaluation, you can look them up. And then just secondly, it's a funny story, 2 seconds, is we had lunch years ago in a bad restaurant in Medellin, and they came out to give us a survey, and literally it was like a 60-question survey about their restaurant. So it's like, it's like people just don't want to take the time to do long, and it was ridiculous. I just stopped. So anyway, next question. Megan wants to know, can you share an example when you used an evaluation approach based on a specific indigenous knowledge generation and worldviews? So instead of kind of predefining the characteristic, have you worked with indigenous or other communities where all the criteria for what's important comes from them?
Yes, for example, I mean, when I do evaluations, when I'm designing my interview questions, I work with the organization who've done that. What are some of the ways? For example, we did an evaluation of a madrasa project in Pakistan. So, for example, what would we ask people? What would have looked like a good change? What kind of changes are good indicators for positive changes in your community between, let's say, Muslims and Christians and Shias and Sunnis? So we, for example, if we did not expect interfaith marriages to be a good indicator because that was far too fixed in that community, but we looked at whether people started visiting each other or celebrating each other on their respective holidays. So we asked for example, what were some of the situation before and then after. So for example, so that was one way to go about it. So also, for example, in another evaluation in Philippines, we tried to understand what were some of the issues that were important, how success was defined for people in local context. And then we sort of tried to incorporate their definition of success and then put also the definition of success from the organization and from the funders. So there was the big funding organization that the implementing organization was reporting to. They had a different definition of what they were looking for. The implementing organization had a different definition, and the local community, and we had different people in the local community, people who were feeling they were more at sort of the unprivileged sort of community as opposed to the main, like majority minority groups in the community, how they viewed. So we tried to understand and ask them how they defined success, whether the program was successful, if they thought it was successful, why not, and then try to incorporate all of those perspectives and sort of try to come up with what are areas of agreement and disagreement in their definitions and to present that in the report.
Thank you so much. So I'll do Samar's question, and please keep the questions coming in. You have a longer comment, raise your hand. So Samar, I think you've answered most of his question. He's wondering what resources do you recommend to learn, whether for free, what skills do you think are critical? So if you have anything, and then I would add one extra question, where is the field of evaluation going? So not just what do you need to know today, but what do you think in 5 or 10 years are going to be the key trends?
I think I'll start with resources. I think there's a couple of online resources that's really important. The CDA, Do No Harm tools are, as far as I know, free and online. I find Jean-Paul Lederer's reflective peace building tool to be a very good resource, and it's free online. I like the book Real World Evaluation. There are online parts of it, but I think the book is separate, but you could buy the book. I think the Kindle version is cheaper than the original version. I think it's easier to carry as well. I find that book really useful. So there are also some good tools for research design and methodology. They're really, I've been really happy with the ResearchGate. People have been sharing their research in these areas, but I think the M&E for peace is one of the most important resources. They have a lot of different tools that you could look for, categorize them according to level, like intermediate, basic. They have videos, they have all sorts of things. So I personally am a big fan of them. It's Search for Common Ground and other American universities, some other great organizations in our field have come together and collaborate. It's a perfect example of collaboration for good. And so in terms of where we're going, I think one of the things that we're really looking at is that we have been doing a lot of evaluation. So we're going to be reflecting on how to do better evaluation. So we're that meta evaluation that I mentioned, to think and reflect about what are some of the better ways of doing evaluation. How do we identify what evaluation methods work in what contexts? I think we have to reflect on that as well right now. The other area that is, I think, because evaluation has become more common, and then now we know, for example, organizations were asked to do evaluation after 2 years. Then this was raised to 3 years, and now it's 5 years, I think. But now we're starting to have longer term like longitudinal studies, because one of the things about, I talk mostly from peace and development perspective, changes, how do we know they're sustainable, etc. We need to have more time and funding to go back to the sustainability after years, not after 2 years, 3 years, impact of the programs, rather than just, whether the project achieved its stated goals or not. So examining methods, methodologies is another area that we have to be doing. I know that OECD has this DUC standards. They have recently came up with their updated one. They have added another criteria in addition to, like, they had relevance, effectiveness, impact, efficiency, and sustainability, and they added coherence to that, I think.
So I had my second follow-up question, but I think Megan's one of Megan's comments is so good, and I agree, but it would be great to hear your opinion. It's not a question, it's rather more of like your reaction to this comment of the need to decolonize evaluation, and the way she supports that statement is that most significant change and outcome harvesting methodologies are very good for single donor funded programs, but where they are not very great is playing with other, playing well in the sandbox, or as she said, methods aren't conducive to multi-agency, multi-sector evaluations. And if they happen, they're not that great. So how does it look for you, Ayse, decolonize an evaluation?
I think that's an excellent question and a very important one. In my experience, evaluators have another responsibility of training and educating the funders who are asking for evaluation. So that's why one of the reasons I think it's really important to have the opportunity to talk directly to the funders and to ask them what they expect and give them. So for example, in one of my experiences with one of the donors, I talked to them about why I think it was relevant, if you were to do an impact evaluation on this topic, to have most significant change stories incorporated into this project and how it could be complementing these other methods. So we, especially when you're dealing with multiple donor funded programs, each donor has its own evaluation methods. For example, EU has its own standards, USAID has its own standards, then all these other organizations, if it's a private funder foundation, they have their own requirements. But that many of those funders do not know the field, do not know the program, and do not know enough about evaluation methods. They may know, for example, evaluation of one particular kind of project, which is economic development project, but they may not have a better understanding of how evaluations would work in local context. I think the role of the evaluator as a facilitator is also to facilitate that and create a balance of opinions, because funders have the most power because they get to decide and pull the strings because they pay for the money. But at the end, I mean, my experience, many of the funders do this because they want to learn and they want to make the right decisions. They come into this with the good intentions. So communicating with them and talking to them and helping them understand the unique needs of each evaluation is really important. I found them to be super receptive, and when you hear them, when you explain your perspective, they trust your expertise. They know what, because you're the evaluator, you also have a lot of power and legitimacy because you're the evaluator. I think giving the explanation, I find them to be very receptive and understanding that people want to do the right thing most of the time. I can't talk every time, but so I think that's important, giving voice to the local populations, whatever, whoever they are. But when you're dealing with the local populations, there are also differences of opinion within the local communities. Different stakeholders in the local communities may have completely different understanding of success, balance. So you have to be able to manage all those different needs, interests, and power dynamics. I think it's hard, but I don't think I always succeed. But yeah, hopefully that was a answer that was satisfactory.
Oh, absolutely. Very interesting. And I'm eating my words because I started criticizing the need to put questionnaires. And here we have in our chat the career chat feedback. If you guys can uh, follow suit for our
Yeah.
serve you and how can we continue this program. But if you feel like this is a total contradiction, I understand if you don't want to go, but Craig made me do it. uh, I'm kidding. This is what happens when you criticize. My question, Aisha, and we still have 7 minutes to if you have other questions. um, in 2020, and especially when thinking about evaluation that relies so much on data collection techniques and a lot of time going to the field, the funders want to see the effectiveness on the program on the ground. And with the 2020 realities, how is the evaluation field adapting so that they don't get secondary sources for the data collection?
So I could tell you, like, I've done an evaluation during COVID. So it was the evaluative assessment, but to see whether evaluation is timely or impact evaluation. So of course we couldn't travel. Uh, it's a program that has locations everywhere in the globe. So what we've done is we set up weekly meetings with the team there, who put me in touch with a lot of different people. I gave them a list of criteria that I'm looking for, whom to evaluate. We did a lot of Zoom meetings. We even held a Zoom focus group discussions. And it's not same as going and visiting, but this was the preface of the actual impact evaluation. So overall, it was great, I would say, because we did interviews. I was able to spend at least an hour of interviews without moving from one country to another. And then many of the people were actually now used to Zoom. They were overburned, so we had to pay attention to their specific, focus group discussions. We had to keep time carefully, design it carefully, ask the questions. I mean, I don't know if we succeeded in doing what we wanted to do fully, but it was my very first focus group discussions for evaluations online. I think we learned how to do that better. But I think I attended some of their online Zoom events for the organization, had a big event, global event, where it was like a conference where I was able to attend, observe. And so interview-wise, it's doable. I think you need the support of the organization to set up the interviews. I did all the links because I recorded all the interviews, and the organization that I was interviewing should not have access to those. So Ayse was the one who sent all the evaluation links, sort of the Zoom links, and record them and save it on my system, not to share with them for confidentiality reasons. We were able to get some translator support in some cases. So I think it worked well, but I think it's not to replace, but it actually saves money and time also. I think from what I learned, that some things can be done online better, and interviews are fine online. I did not find that to be any sort of, but then other things, you could do it in person. So it's going to be sort of, think about the expenses of the evaluation. There are ways to use Zoom constructively, not solely, but as a part of helping you in the process.
I think this is the last question. We have others, but this is the last one we'll do for now. And it's an anonymous question. So as someone who studied M&E at the graduate level and has a lot of informal experience, both domestically and internationally, the person's still finding most INGOs, foundations, for-profits, consulting firms like the CV of this person, but they want to see more experience. But they're in the catch-22 because they won't hire for that person to get even more experience. And they're exploring internships. But what are your recommendations for, because that is one of the catch-22s. Unless you have evaluation experience, most places won't hire you. So how do you build it, especially if you need to make a living and you're not still in school?
So what I would say is that in a situation like that, so when you have a team of evaluations, you don't have to be the evaluator, but you work with other evaluators who would hire you as a support person, and then to help you do, like, get you to do some things. So you won't get enough funding then, you'll get like very little, maybe, but it really helps you to build your resume. Voluntary work is very abusive, but unfortunately, I mean, I had to do a lot of voluntary work. I really had to put myself out there to, you know, ask, sit in classes, ask professors when I was younger to like, can I do this? Can I join? I tried to address that issue with my students by creating these opportunities for them to volunteer as a part of the class project. So they actually had a Georgetown backing, so which allowed them to reach out with confidence. And sometimes I would put them in touch with the organizations that I know were interested. I would say, I have a student for the class project. He's really interested in working with you. Would you allow him? And then they could put it on their resume. And then because they show some expertise or some learning, so organizations, like I had a student who did, a couple of students who work for USIP, and then USIP hired them for work in an evaluation. That person actually works at USIP full-time, got a job. Not necessarily from evaluation he does now, but that's how he got in. So I think reaching out to your faculty to put you in touch with organizations, to do internships. I had students, like for example, at Georgetown in the olden days, we had this special summer program. So many of the students did internships for evaluation. I had a student who did an evaluation in Nepal, Lebanon, Jordan, all of that. So so we put them in touch with those, and then we provided, I really, like when they had to do evaluation, they were given more responsibility, that they were prepared. So I work with them on the background to provide them with guidance and what they should do. If they had any questions with how to prepare a theory of change, if they wanted to run with me before, they showed it to their supervisors. I gave them resources. So that was really like really helped them. I think it really, you have to reach out to your faculty, in my opinion. And I thought that was part of my responsibility as a person who's teaching evaluation. I may be teaching back evaluation at George Mason in the future, or at other places, I don't know yet, maybe not. But I think I really love teaching that course, because I think it's a course that really has a philosophical, theoretical dimension of peace and conflict resolution, but puts that into practice. It's very, very sort of practice oriented. And I like to get my students to work voluntarily to organizations, and actually who are, you know, who have the experience and who can work with those areas. So I think any program should definitely encourage or put link their students in the field, provide them with these opportunities to gain that expertise.
And just to follow up on that, you know, I was at Georgetown full-time for 10 years, so we did have a paid fellowship program, so people could do this field work or partnership work, and that the ones who had applied evaluation experience were much more hireable in the future. So if you're not still in grad school or not doing grad school, Vera Solutions is a great evaluation firm that sometimes has fellowships, job openings. Global Giving has fellowships and job openings sometimes. And if you look at the big INGOs, particularly I'd say Mercy Corps and IRC, they often will have US-based or field-based, sometimes part-time or field fellowships or internships. I mean, with COVID, everything's a mess. But sometimes, you know, like I've known people who've been able to go work for IRC for 6 months in a country, or you can do it in the US. But that is a fun, and Tech Change, I'm on their advisory board, has amazing training, costs money, on tech and evaluation. So it's like how to use technical tools. And then you can find a lot, we put in philanthropy universities free, humanitarian leadership academies free. So part of it, even if you can't get the direct experience with an organization, if you keep building your skills, Tech Change, philanthropy university, grad school, training, and some of those give you certificates, that's another way of or at least get like skilled in quantitative analysis, like do something a little different than everybody else. So big, you know, or so like get those advanced skills, or figure out how in the world do you use Salesforce as a tool for evaluation, or so like kind of get something a little bit different. And then I think the last very quick question, then Kata is going to close up and talk about our podcast tomorrow, is I should like, when I've done applied evaluation work, or I still do a lot of consulting work, it's usually like work like insane, burnout, turn in a report, it's filed away somewhere. Sometimes you hear what happened, sometimes you don't. I won't tell too much details, but I did something about 6 years ago, and I did something last year for an organization. And it was different topics, but same institution. And like 5 years later, I looked at what they had changed based on 5 years earlier, and not much had changed. And most of my recommendations were the same. So I'm just curious, like, when you do this kind of consulting work, is it often like work insane hours to turn in something for an arbitrary deadline? That's one question. And the second is like, how do you know the work you've done if you're an outside consultant actually leads to some change?
First of all, depending on the organization, it's a lot of work. You spend more time than you actually agreed to in the first place, which is just, I don't know, it's maybe me, but every single evaluation I did, if I said 10 hours, I spent 15 to 20. And that's fine. I think because I want to do the job itself. So I think it's important. And I think the people do put other organization also puts time in it as well. So I started seeing it as a contribution that I'd like to make rather than, seeing it as a burden. I think your mental positioning is really important. In terms of recommendations being implemented, that is, some organizations want the evaluator to work with them to find ways to implement them. You can work with them as developing a strategy for incorporation. So some organizations that I work with were able to do that. Others were not able to do that for different reasons. Resistance in the group, this and that. Leadership changed. It was forgotten. Something happened. I would like my recommendations to produce change, but at the end of the day, if I take that too personally, or if I feel like that's really not validating the work that I'm doing, it just creates an unnecessary stress on me that I don't want to deal with. So it's up to the organization, I think, what they would like to do with my finding. And I hope they will take it and apply it. Some do, some incorporate parts of it, some don't, but that's beyond my control. I cannot control their behavior. I can only control my own. So I try to focus on that. That's for my own sanity. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but.
And I would agree 100% to you. There's so much we can't control, and 2020 has been the best teacher for telling us how to manage stress and where to focus and energies. And I want to end by saying, Ayse, this was an amazing introduction of how to, for those that are thinking of M&E as a possibility in their careers. I think this is gonna be one of the webinars that people are gonna watch. And I can't see myself watching Zoom recordings, but this is worth it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a huge compliment. If someone, I'm like, who can just go back to see this? And we just really want to thank you. We hope you come and visit us here.
I'd love to.
Again, everyone, thank you for being here so late in the year, which shows your commitment to want to improve yourself as an individual. And at PCDN, we're still going strong. Tomorrow, we're airing an amazing new episode with the lawyer, civil rights expert, Ehsan Safar. An amazing story. I can't spoil it, but I really want to. It's not a live episode. They're just pre-recorded and they're not on video, but just go walk your dog and listen about Ehsan Safar's amazing life story. And Ayse, I wish you an amazing, safe, wonderful year 2021, filled with more than evaluations, health, and lots of love. And to all of you,
thank you.
We will, this is the closing of our PCDN Career Chats, which we said that we were not going to stop until the global pandemic was not resolved. So who knows, maybe we'll be seeing you for the entire next year, but this is our way of giving back to the community and supporting the change makers around the world.
Yeah, so we're just stopping for 2020. We start again January 7th or 6th with these.
It's okay. Just let us sleep for a couple of weeks and then we'll re-emerge, re-energized. And the podcast will have this week and the next one, like during Christmas Day, my holiday gift to you would be the last episode of season 7. And see you in 2020 so that we continue changing the world and making a living. Bye-bye, everyone. And thank you again, Ayse.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year's, happy holidays, and safe New Year.
Happy vaccinating, whoever gets a vaccine.
Yes.
In your homes, people, and wear a mask.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon and evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.